What you call it, Rhino? A roundtable is now in our midst here in the Element Well studio, consisting of Representative Kevin Felsher, Senator Scott DeLano, and Donna Echols, owner of the Echols Group. So, welcome, folks. Good to see you. Where do we start? Kevin, you want to give us kind of an overview of this bill that I believe the House is going to consider first? Is that right? Kind of the sequence here that his concerns turning these guns into automatic weapons, machine guns, Glocks, right?
That's exactly right. There's what's called a Glock switch or a sear switch that will, when inserted, take a semi-automatic handgun that's firing like 1 round a second or so into a machine gun that can fire off about 20 rounds in 2.5 seconds. And we're seeing the devastating effects of that. Just here recently, we had a gentleman killed, I think, on North State Street, Anthony Davis. And we had a deputy in George County in January killed, Deputy Jeremy Malone. And so these are just two recent tragedies that we've suffered because of these switches.
So did this come about, Representative Felsher, because law enforcement approached the legislature and said we got to get these things off the street?
I believe it was an effort of law enforcement, also our prosecutors, and that they recognized with no tool from a state level to address this, there's not a whole lot we can do unless the ATF from a federal level wants to take it up. And quite frankly, they're overwhelmed and cannot. So That's kind of the genesis of this bill.
Donna, what's your interest here?
Yeah, so I'm here representing law enforcement, and the police chiefs, actually it was our Gulfport chief, Adam Cooper, that brought this to our attention this summer, and they were inundated with these Glock switches in Gulfport, and as we started talking about it, we found out that this was a problem all over the state. So we took the issue to the legislature to ask them to pass this bill that mirrors what the federal law does.
Senator DeLano, what's the attitude in the Senate side about this?
I think it's something that we're definitely going to take up, and I would expect for it to pass. You know, these switches are made through the use of a 3D printer that are just about available in every high school in the state now. And we know that there have been some places throughout the state where high school printers have been used to print these devices. And I'll also add on to what Donna has said. I was approached by the ATF, by a person within the ATF several years ago to address some of these issues. And what's important here is that there are federal laws that prevent this, but there are very few federal officers that are able to handle these cases. They're usually working on much larger cases, and it's the locals that are that have these interactions with these type of devices on the street. So what the ATF was asking for was for a state law that would mirror the federal law so that our local jurisdictions and our local prosecutors can prosecute these events. And it's not just limited to just the Glock switch, which I will tell you the bill that has been passed in the House that's going to come over to the Senate is limited to just the Glock switch, or what we're calling the Glock switch. But the ATF's concerns were also on firearms that have had their serial numbers altered in one way or another. And there were a lot of guns that were stolen that were immediately having their serial numbers destroyed on them. Police officers were finding them on the street, and if they wanted to, they were able to take those guns off the street. But technically, if the ATF didn't take it, then the perpetrator or whoever was in possession of that gun could get it back through legal means, because we still do not have a law on the books that prevents that or prevents the possession of a firearm with an altered serial number.
So do you feel like, Representative Felsher, are we augmenting federal law with this state legislation, or are we just kind of restating it?
Well, we're definitely augmenting it, but in addition to that, for example, if a youth right now were to be caught with a gun with one of these in it, nothing would happen.
Yeah.
When this bill passes, it will be handled at a felony level, still in youth court, unless the charges were upgraded to adult.
Okay.
But there will be a track record. There will be a record of that to follow. So right now, that's an added bonus to this, because prosecutors are dealing with 12, 13, 14-year-olds who are often in possession of a gun once, twice, 3 times, but it's not being registered as a felony. this will make it a felony, and this will hopefully allow them to be sent to somewhere like Oakley where they can get some correctional behavior, put to them. So.
Yeah. So I'm assuming, Donna, that from a law enforcement perspective, are they reporting to you situations where they're finding these guns and they're seizing them? Hopefully, and fortunately, they hadn't been used yet. Maybe hadn't been discharged with the switch on them, used to harm other people and property with the automatic capability. But they're trying to get them off the street.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I know of an example where we had a trooper that was chasing somebody that fled a scene, and we later discovered the gun in the woods, and it had a Glock switch on it.
Okay.
There was an episode, too, during Mardi Gras in Biloxi, where another situation where a suspect pointed a gun at an officer, and it had a Glock switch on it. Fortunately, he didn't pull the trigger. I wanted to piggyback on something that Scott said, too. The reason we're seeing so many of these now is used to people could only get them from overseas. So we weren't seeing as many. Now with them printing them on 3D printers, they're turning up everywhere.
Well, I didn't know that was the case, Senator DeLano, that they were actually producing these, fabricating them, if you will, through 3D printers. I got to tell you, for years, I've tried to point that out to the gun control advocates that, what are you going to do when everybody's got a printer at home? They can just print whatever gun they want. I mean, this is a problem that's going to go beyond just Glock switches here.
That's exactly right. But let's understand that what we're doing is we're trying to apply a pragmatic approach for trying to get these very deadly firearms off the street. They are modifying a handgun into a killing machine.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of support from gun enthusiasts across the state who understand that this is a very unique situation that we need to address, we must address, and it's something that is intended to help law enforcement and prosecutors across the state remove these deadly weapons from our streets.
And Gerard, just recently it was reported, I think Jackson Police Department is seizing about 15 to 20 of these a month. And the statistics are astronomically going up. I think ATF reported something like a 500% increase in seizure of these in the thousands. So these are proliferating, to Senator DeLano's point. It used to be you were buying them from China and from Mexico, and now you've got reports of kids making them on 3D printers, and they're getting between $100 and $200 a piece street value for them.
So it's kind of an industry behind the scenes, so to speak, a dark industry, if you will. Yeah, I get that. That's a problem. So it almost sounds to me like, Donna, that you could have situations where law enforcement would be outgunned. Literally.
Without a doubt. I mean, this bill for us is critical to officer safety.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the situation where someone is pointing a Glock switch enabled weapon at a law enforcement officer. They pull the trigger there. It's high probability that law officer isn't going to make it.
And they won't. I mean, we saw that with Deputy Malone. As soon as he got out on that stop, he did not have a chance to respond.
Yeah. Wow, this is incredible. I mean, but Senator DeLano, to your point, this isn't going to stop here. I mean, I realize something needs to be done here, but surely our legislature is thinking about perhaps something else maybe to kind of get our arms around this.
We're definitely very, very sensitive to the fact that Mississippians are very much in tune with their gun rights and wanting to protect them. So is the legislature. Yeah. And I think that we've shown that over and over again. Yeah. And I will say that in this bill, the way that it was originally introduced, we introduced it in a way to get the message out that we intend to do this. And then we've also worked with the firearms instructors and the ATF and others across the state to make sure that we provide edits through the process. This is exactly the reason why we have this process. Yeah. We've provided edits. The House has done some. We've got some additionals that we're going to add over on the Senate side. But we want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences. This is This is intended to prevent or try to remove a deadly threat to law enforcement agents that are on the street every single day. That and only that.
Okay.
We're going to continue to work on this process, and I look forward to being able to handle this on the Senate side.
Makes sense. If you guys can hang around through the break, when we come back, we can maybe turn our attention to some other matters that you legislators are working on down there.
Sure.
And I got another question for you I thought about too, Donna, when we come back.
Okay.
Stay tuned, folks. We're in the Element Well studio. We're coming right back. Studio, we got the roundtable in here. Representative Kevin Felsher, Senator Scott DeLano, and Donna Echols. We're talking about this legislation that would make it more illegal or certainly enhance the penalties, the crime of owning a Glock switch, or I guess enabling a weapon with a Glock switch that turns it into essentially a fully automatic handgun. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yes.
Okay. One of our regulars, Ben from Madison, says, I'm okay with sensible regulation, but I always worry about slippery slopes when state legislatures present measures that would prohibit a law-abiding citizen from obtaining specific firearms. Before I turn that over to the legislators here, Ben, I can tell you they're both nodding in a yes fashion while I'm reading this. So, Scott, you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly what I was talking about beforehand. We understand that, and we're trying to make sure that everything that we do is in line with, and it does not offend legal gun owners. And in fact, there's specific language in here that allows a person who is licensed and it is properly certified to have a or an automatic rifle or automatic stamp to be able to own one of these switches. It's not a complete outlaw. We are following all the federal guidelines for ownership, proper ownership of this, and I think it's something similar to like a silencer. You know, you have to have you have to go through a particular certification process and a pathway to be able to own a silencer, and that is also what we're trying to do with this bill. We understand the slippery slope. We do not want the legislature messing with our gun rights, and we're probably two of the biggest in the House and the Senate when it comes to that. But this is not for that. This is where you're taking a handgun that goes in someone's pocket and you're turning it into a machine gun, and you're killing people with it. That is very different than a lot of the other things that we've approached and what the feds have tried to do in the past. We are both adamantly opposed to the overreach that we see the federal government trying to do. We think this is a pragmatic approach to help law enforcement officers across the state address an issue that they are seeing that is intended to kill public safety officers. And
that was the question I was going to ask you, Don. Is that what we're seeing in just out in the public squares, that the folks that own these Glock switches, that is the purpose, is to just overpower law enforcement, or they have some other use for it?
It's strictly to overpower law enforcement. These bullets go through their bulletproof vests. The other tragedy that these devices do is because there's so much lack of control over the aim with a Glock switch in it. You can imagine a crowd of people, like at any parade or any event like that where you've got a big group of people, and because of the lack of control after you pull that trigger, the spray of bullets that can go across an entire crowd, and innocent people
I got you.
Are in the way.
So Chris from Past Christian on the C Spire text line asks where I was going. I was talking about, so is there not a law against minors having guns with serial numbers taken off? I thought there were laws for that already. Where I was going with that is if we can't enforce the laws we already have, why do we enact new laws? What do you think, Representative Felsher?
So there's a couple things there. Number one, to address the reason why we're enacting a new law is to buttress the federal law that's already there, but quite frankly, they don't have the resources to enforce. What we're hearing from our prosecutors and our law enforcement officers is if we find somebody with one of these, unless the feds take it on, they're walking. They're not going. And in reference to the juveniles with the guns, unfortunately, if you talk to some youth judges, some prosecutors, those youths with the gun are not being charged with a felony. And they can't even, from my understanding, they're not even being sent to Oakley anymore if they have a gun once or twice or even 3 times. You have to have a felony, and that's not a felony.
Gotcha. On the C Spire text line, I would much rather our state handle this issue than having the federal government taking the lead on it. That's Chris in New Albany. You're shaking your head,
Absolutely.
Senator. Yeah. I think most people would agree that the laws are better enforced closer to where the law is broken in situations like this.
Yeah, I would like for our local law enforcement to be able to deal with this directly and not have to be dependent upon our federal agents to come in and do any type of work whatsoever. The reason why, and there seems to be a disconnect in the public may think that, or some of the public may think that because there's a federal law, there's no need to have a state law. But that's not the case. That's not the fact. The fact is that you have to have a state statute for our local prosecutors to be able to prosecute for these types of crimes. And throughout the legislative process, you will always hear us talking about, it could be about Medicaid, it could be about transportation, but we're always conforming to federal law or conforming to federal code. And this is something where we're having to do this to help with preventing or providing additional public safety and removing these types of guns and trying to remove these types of guns from the streets.
Jeff from Loosedale expresses the concern, says gun control is I guess what he sees this is a violation of our Second Amendment.
Well, I would say to that you still can have a gun. No one's saying you can't have a gun. We're just saying, if you're going to have a gun, don't alter it into something it's not supposed to be. Your Glock or your handgun in general is not supposed to be a machine gun. And because you have people who are acting nefariously and altering these guns into basically killing machines that can kill a multitude of people, just like the gentleman I mentioned that was killed unintentionally just a few weeks ago in Jackson. But for that Glock switch, perhaps he's still alive because it's not spraying 20, 30 rounds out. So we're having to address, it's not like we sought this out, but this is a problem. And if you Google Glock switches throughout the nation, I think recently in Houston, one officer was killed and another seriously injured from serving a search warrant on someone with the Glock switch. But just Google it. You'll see where these switches are leading to the deaths of law enforcement officers and our citizens.
So one of our listeners is concerned about these fake Glock switches, that they're just back plates or something like that, to that effect. I'm not familiar with that personally, but the poser back plates is the way they described it. So would something that is fake like that, would it also be against the law? Would that violate the law if it really doesn't have that capability of converting that weapon to an automatic one?
I would not think so. I would think certainly at the discretion of law enforcement, they would assess that situation and find that if it were not a true Glock switch or sear, that they would not take that to the prosecutor. And if they did, the prosecutor may ultimately decide not to take that on because he's got to talk to 12 different people and convince them that that's a crime. I think they have better things to do than that.
So a couple of people, Donna, have questioned, I think, a statement you made about being able to penetrate a bulletproof vest. They don't think to see that that's the case. Is that true or not?
That is true. There was a report out of Texas about an incident that happened like that. So, and to be honest, it could be that the vest was an older vest.
Yeah. Okay. Get the mic there.
But hey, Donna, one other thing about this, though, we got to remember this. When we're talking about gun advocates, we're usually talking about someone who is pointing a gun, aiming at a single target, and squeezing a trigger with a single round. And that's what we normally do. Professional shooters are skilled at being able to double tap, or you train for that kind of stuff. What we're doing here is we're taking that single round, or as we call throwing a round downrange, where they're just slinging guns and slinging rounds, and we're turning it into a knife. Because when you have 20 rounds coming out in under 2.5 seconds, it doesn't matter how you hold it. These criminals know, they're not shooters to begin with. They just hold that gun out and they're just swinging it back and forth like a sprinkler. And those rounds are coming out of that gun. It's not discriminating. It is hitting anything that's downrange. And in a lot of cases, when you have 20 rounds coming across, you're much more likely to hit something. And this is why it's so dangerous for not just police officers, but for the public in general.
And Gerard, I just say I'm a lifelong member of the NRA, lifetime member. I'm a gun advocate, and I have a strong Second Amendment voting record. But this is common sense. And our law enforcement officers and our prosecutors saying we need help. And I think it's our job to help them.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not an expert on this, and maybe this is for you, Donna, but even if you have a bulletproof vest, I mean, you don't have a full body armor suit on, right? I mean,
You're right.
You could still do a lot of damage, if not to the body, if not assassinate somebody, essentially.
And to your point, sadly, we saw that with the deputy down in George County. That's exactly what happened to him.
Because someone said they're a retired cop, and they said the vests aren't they're not buying vests to provide adequate protection is the reason these could penetrate. Okay, I guess that's possible, but that still doesn't account for the rest of your body.
Right.
That's subject.
Headshots, anything like that.
Got it. All right, folks. Appreciate you coming in and explaining this very complex matter. Thanks a lot. We'll be tracking this legislation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Gerard.
You got it. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.